Nestled beside the verdant eastern shores of Narrabeen Lagoon, on the beautiful northern beaches of Sydney, lies an unprepossessing cream brick building in which nearly every month since 1962 the Warringah Booklovers Club has held its meetings. The ever-growing collection of books that forms the club's library has also been housed here since that time. However, the club had its origins nearly a decade before it moved here, and in this year, 2013, it is happily celebrating 60 years since it was founded. It is timely, then, to reflect on the many ways both the club and life generally have changed over those years. It's difficult for some of us to remember a time when the northern beaches of Sydney were part of the cultural wasteland which was Australian suburbia. The dynamic, diverse society we are part of now is a world away from that which existed in 1953 when the Warringah Booklovers Club began. Remember those days before television, before concepts like mature-age students, working wives, childcare and two-income families? The days when feminism, the pill and the sexual revolution were still waiting in the wings to change the lives of women completely. Remember when women didn't go anywhere special without dressing appropriately, when they addressed each other by their married names and were honour-bound to uphold a certain standard? We probably remember some of this because many of us were growing up in the 50s and 60s. Our parents were paying off their home loans and possibly saving to buy a motor car. Our mothers were very often housebound and isolated. The Women's Weekly and radio were their links with the outside world. But some women were determined not to waste away in the suburbs. Some had been well educated but forced to retire from even the simplest of careers, like teaching and nursing, because of commonly held views regarding working married women. Indeed, some had experienced a new kind of freedom during wartime and were reluctant to give that up. Into this cultural void stepped a remarkable woman called Jo Quilty. Mrs. Quilty had the view that women were being wasted. Once a woman had established her home and delivered her babies safely into primary school, there were not too many ways left for her to broaden her mind, in fact, to open doors. The idea of a book club such as this had already occurred to her before the day in April 1953 when Mrs. Quilty invited 4 of her friends to her Narrabeen home to exchange and discuss books. These literary afternoons became a regular event at 100 Ocean Street. By 1955, there were 12 members, all being friends of Jo Quilty. Many still had young children at home, and often the children came to the meetings. As new members kept arriving and more books were being gathered together, a new venue was required to house the growing club. The venue was Coleroy House, and subs were £1 1 per year. Books were amassed by donation, rules were laid down, and a framework was developed with objectives listed. Guest speakers were introduced and visitors were allowed on club days. In 1960, it was discovered that Warringah Shire Council was going to build a new hall for the Girl Guides by the lake at Narrabeen. Mrs. Quilty persuaded Council to allow the book club to share the hall with the guides. And so the building known as the Women's Recreation Centre was erected. Subs were raised to £2 2 membership had risen to 88. The club was now up and running and gathering a momentum of its own. As well as club days, there was the monthly book discussion. Early meetings were devoted to books read, each person being given an allocated time slot to talk about their book. By April 1962, journalist Mr. Vic Worsted was running the discussions. His expertise and knowledge of literature proved to be a huge influence on the reading standards. After Mr. Worsted's death in 1971, the leadership of book discussions became more flexible until it developed into the format we have today. Once the hall in Narrabeen was established as the home of the Booklovers Club, it was much easier for the librarian Joyce Dawson to set up the library. Because of the size and nature of the Booklovers Club collection, it was decided to use the coloured stickers system, which is still in use today. Joyce was an excellent librarian. She knew where to put her hand on a book, if asked, and was a broad reader of all genres. I found this little piece from Yvette Meyer in the archives. One day I was on the beach in Collaroy. It was a hot summer's day, and near me I saw someone in a bikini under a large umbrella reading the Times Literary Supplement. I felt there could only be one person in Australia on a hot beach reading such a publication, and it had to be our librarian. I advanced on hands and knees to reconnoitre, and sure enough, it was Joyce. Books were selected by a committee and recommended by members who had read the book first. Not all books were considered suitable. For example, in 1974, Maeve Binchy was rejected, and paperback books were listed separately. However, a brief glance at the minutes of the Book Selection Committee 1974 showed a wide variety of books which were recommended for purchase. For example, The Breakers by Kit Denton, Passage to India by E.M. Forster, All the President's Men by Bernstein and Woodward, My Brilliant Career by Miles Franklin, Cockatoo by Patrick White, and even Jaws by Peter Benchley. The purchase of books was done by the librarian with help from willing souls prepared to go to the city and scramble from store to store. Joyce's husband would drive them to each shop so they could use the car to stow the books along the way. Then he would drive them home. Looking back now, it seems there was a lot more to the Warringah Booklovers Club in its early days. Other activities included a play reading group, a music appreciation group, theatre parties, and weekly classes for the study of French and painting. In those years before U3A and adult education classes, the Booklovers Club was an important part of the cultural scene. It is a fact which never ceases to surprise us that unless one asks the question, one cannot assume to know the answer. This is never more apparent than when searching for guest speakers for our club days. Looking into the archives reveals an amazing collection of speakers who have addressed our club. Here is a very brief sample. Dame Leonie Kramer, Morris West, Thomas Keneally, Dimphna Cusack, Ruth Park. And sometimes when the question is asked formally, the answer comes directed in a writing unexpected, from no less a luminary than Patrick White, stating that, "To be perfectly frank, I have never addressed anybody in my life and should not know how to begin. Because a person is a writer, it doesn't necessarily follow that he is also a speaker." See, even our rejection letters are worth reading. Our club now is just as relevant as it was back in 1953. It is still a place where women can gather together to share their love and knowledge of books and authors, to listen to interesting speakers, and to share a light lunch. We have over 100 members and 7,000 or so books. The library is open in the mornings 3 days a week and is available not only for members of the Booklovers Club, but for members of the public who wish to borrow a book for a minimal fee. The library is staffed by volunteer members. New members are still introduced by existing ones. However, the process is usually a formality. Guest speakers are gathered through word of mouth or outside publicity, or even through a personal request from a member. In the last few years, we have had authors like Peter Fitzsimons, Amanda Hampson, and Susan Duncan. The biggest change the club has seen is in the age range of its members. Whereas in the past many of the members were young housebound wives and mothers, it seems that the club has become an outlet for retired women who still want to experience some mental stimulation as well as a chance to meet with friends. The extra activities like art and music appreciation, which were once part of the club, have dropped away to be replaced in the wider community by U3A and adult education classes. The monthly bulletin is a vital part of the club. It contains an overview of the month's activities, as well as a summary of new books which have been bought for the library. Members receive a copy on Club Day, and if absent, are sent a copy by email or the post. The Book Selection Committee meets every 2 months. They are responsible for suggesting books to be purchased, although any member of the club can nominate a book to be considered. The process is a democratic one. Once the list of books to be purchased is made, they are ordered online and bought through a website in England at a fraction of the price paid 10 or even 5 years ago. They are then delivered to the librarian within a week. The future holds many challenges for a small club like ours. The advent of e-readers and the decline of newspapers and bookshops have all impacted on the way we read. We hope that the Booklovers Club of Warringah will still be around for another 60 years. In the meantime, we are all a little wiser, more connected with each other, and very grateful for the vision of Jo Quilty and her friends. And what a wonderful motto they left with us: books open doors.
Oh, I joined in about, when I started going there, when the year had started in about 53. Well, I really don't remember officially joining a club, signing a form or anything like that. I knew Jo well before the club started, but I had little small children at home, and so we used to go there for afternoon teas where we talked books and exchanged books. We also raffled a book each week, and the money from that went towards buying more books for us to have to read. I don't know where on earth they were stored, probably in Jo's place. I know that they had to be introduced, people had to recommend them, and somebody had to second them, and then it had to go before the committee, and then they had to wait for another month before they were allowed to come in. That's when I was part of doing that. It was the days when everybody was far more formal than they are now. We used to have lunches where we raised money for the clubs. We went at private homes. I've been a member of the committee for a while, and I was a member of the book selection committee, which I found interesting but hard work to try and get exactly the books you felt everybody would like. I've been a librarian for years, and I used to do the register. I've done a lot of backroom jobs. I've never wanted to be actually a president or a secretary or anything like that. I was one of the librarians, yes. I wasn't head librarian ever, but I was a librarian. I quite a long time actually. Books, interesting books that I was able to read. Friendships. which were good, still are, and also mental stimulation that when you're doing the work and helping in the library and things like that.
I moved to Northern Beaches in 2001. Shortly after, at a U3A meeting, I met Joyce Crow and Thelma Bennett, who both said, "Come along to a book club meeting." They'd been going for years. So here I am, 11 years later. I've been on the book selection committee for many years, then the librarian for 4 years, and now president for 3 years. All of which I have really enjoyed, especially working with such an amazing committee. It's been such a great way to make really good friends. In the last few years, some of the memorable speakers have been the gracious Caroline Jones, the amazing story Thomas Keneally had to tell about finding the story of Schindler's List, Hugh Mackay on what makes us tick, Susan Wyndham, senior literary editor of the Herald, and of course our favourite local, Michael Rowbottom, and his psychological thrillers.
Around about 1992, I think, I joined a golf club and I played with Yvonne Walker and Joan Whelan, and they were members and they insisted that I come, and they knew I was a reader, I'd been a teacher, and so they insisted I join. Took me 3 months to join, mind you. I had to be vetted. In those days you had to go through a process of committee meetings deciding whether you could join or not. Oh, because I've been a reader all my life, ever since before I went to school. It was one of my passions. Yes, so many of the members who have died since I joined, we used to have them talk on at our AGM. They would be the speaker, and you learned quite a lot more about them, and that was interesting. We also used to have outings. We used to have Christmas parties that Joan Whelan used to have plays, go through literature and find things that we could act out. At one time we had guest speakers other than authors, and that was opening up other worlds as far as I was aware. There are too many, particularly authors. I think they might be the worst of them all. They never write and you know and that sort of thing, but they speak it every second word, and it's very irritating. I'm sorry, that's very critical, I know, but it just resonates with me every time I hear people speaking. I hardly know anyone there now because they're all new faces to me. I miss being a volunteer on Saturday mornings because I used to meet the readers coming in, but it was good contact with other readers and to talk about the books that they were returning and that sort of thing.
I joined the club because all my life I've been extremely interested in books and literature, and I felt that it would be a good vehicle for meeting new people as well. I've been exposed to lots of different kinds of genres and authors through the wonderful speakers that we have. I've met many intelligent and insightful women who belong to the club, and most importantly, I've made lots of good friends. As the librarian for the last 3 years, I'm responsible for facilitating the book discussion group, which sometimes is like herding cats to get people back onto the subject. But we have wonderful discussions that are insightful, thought-provoking, and often make me want to go home and reread the book again. During this year, I've been researching the archives for the anniversary, and I've found a parallel between the changes in the club and the changes in Australian society over the last 60 years. This story may be apocryphal, but in the early days when you needed 4 people to nominate you to join the club, there were 2 women who were eminently suitable for the club, but they were rejected. They were rejected because instead of writing their applications on plain paper, they wrote them on lined paper. How things have changed.
I joined the club in 1970. We were migrants fresh out from England, and I was looking for something like this that would be stimulating. I had small children, and I found it in the book club. I've gained a lot of good friends who were of my way of thinking. It's not that we were all brilliantly intellectual, we weren't, but we loved to read and we loved to learn. And I think that is the most important thing. And we used to have lunch in those days, just sandwiches and coffee, and sit around and talk. And I'm not shy, but I found a lot of people would not talk to me. So many years passed, and Gwen Randall, who was quite a character in the club, said, "I think it's time Yvonne was told why she got that weird treatment at the beginning." Well, they used to have a waiting list in those days, and I was well down the list when my name was put on, and Joe said to the committee, "If we don't get her now, we won't get her." So I was jumped to the top of the queue, and that upset a lot of people. At one time there was emphasis on creative writing, and people would write pieces for the bulletin. It might be book reviews which were popular, or it might be something amusing that had happened to them, or whatever. And this has all disappeared, as has the practice of having a Christmas supplement. Now, it was hard work. I was bulletin editor for many years, and you really had to get your gun out and hold it to their heads to get them to write, but they would write. And all that has disappeared, and I think it's a shame, really. Another aspect of club life that's disappeared is the habit of us entertaining ourselves at least one meeting a year. We would have our own speakers in place of guest speakers. And we would have occasionally a seminar to which we would invite outside speakers. And I recall one lady, who I think had better be nameless, who decided she would patronise us, and she did. And she referred in one of her talks to the Gobi Desert, and she said, "Not that any of you all know where that is." And Hensel Dean, who was a great character, sat in the front row and said loudly, "Well, I, for one, certainly do." And that was the end of the guest speaker. She quietened down. So we've had our serious moments, we've had our comic moments.